Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Bobby Sylvester with Mike Tagliere, as always. Tags is fresh off writing over 20,000 words this week, so he's either close to dead or knows everything there is to know about this week's slate. Which is it, Tags?
I don't know if I know everything about this week's slate, but between myself, you, and our guest today, I have a good feeling that we're going to wrap our minds together and figure out everybody that we should be playing in this slate.
Yeah, our guest today is DFS superstar Dan Gaspar, and you know him as Mr. Tuttle. That's where you can find him on Twitter, at Mr. Tuttle05. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
So Tag and I were talking about it, and we decided that for this show, rather than us share any advice or even ask you questions, we would just sit back and learn the whole time. Do you think you can handle that?
So you just want me to talk for 30 minutes straight or so?
Yeah, that's cool with me. What do you think, Tags?
Yeah, no, it'd be nice to sit back. Dan is he's one of the professionals in the industry that he plays DFS for kind of a living, and he's one of the people that I listen to on other podcasts, and he's one of those people that I'm very open to listening to what he has to say. I can learn things from him, so I'm excited for the podcast today to learn from. I would consider, Dan, I don't know if you consider yourself, but you're a DFS pro.
Yeah, I'd consider myself that.
That's pretty cool to say. So, really, how does somebody get to this point where you are in DFS? Do you just watch a ton of film, crunch crazy numbers? Is it a strategy thing, or are you like some kind of time traveler?
Combination of all of the above, except for the time traveler. So it's a lot. It's a mixture of everything. I think what I have found a lot of success in personally is, I think I'm really good at lineup construction, so not necessarily even do I think I have more knowledge than anybody out there really with any sport, but I think that if you can be good at consolidating information, be good at manipulating projections and things like that nature, and then kind of figure out how to make that into a DFS lineup, then you can have some pretty good success without even knowing that much about a sport.
I see. That's fantastic insight. And this is part of the reason we wanted to have Dan on, is going through the slate today. We're going to talk about those things. And this might be a little bit different than most DFS episodes where it's like talking about certain positions. I'm going to make sure I kind of hammer the point home to see what the difference is. Like someone myself, there's been a lot of followers that have said they've been trying to start playing DFS just recently, and that they're like, I'm struggling. And the thing is that there's a lot to learn. It's a big learning curve when you go to the DFS world. It's nothing like season long, but going through and learning lessons, how much you play in cash, how much do you play in tournaments, going things like that, and the difference between the two. So we're going to separate that in the show today, as we've been recently breaking down the first half of our conversation is going to be about cash games, and then we're going to go into the second half talking about more tournament plays, which is, those are the guys that are maybe less than 5% owned that we're looking to take a shot on tournaments. But the first question I wanted to ask you, Dan, is let's start at the quarterback position. And there's only two quarterbacks I'm really considering for cash games this week. One is Phillip Rivers, and I think everybody can understand why I would like Phillip Rivers against the Redskins, who are traveling across the country to go and play out in Los Angeles. But my other one is DeShone Kizer. Now, this is the question I wanted to ask you from a strategy standpoint. When do you get to the point where you say, a bad quarterback is so bad that I don't want to play him in cash? Because I made the mistake last week of playing Trevor Siemian. It did not pan out. He had a great matchup. Everything seemed to be just fine. The wide receivers matchups were great. I feel the same way about DeShone Kizer this week. I feel like he's been producing as of late, which makes me feel a little bit safer. But do you feel queasy when you go down to pay $4,900 for a quarterback?
A little bit, but especially on DraftKings this year, they have kind of suppressed DraftKings pricing, where I think it is your normal cash game strategy is probably looking at guys under 6,000, and even every once in a while you'll dip below that $5,000 mark. I'm on board with Kizer as a fine player this week, really on both sides. I think the one main concern I would have with him is if this game basically just becomes slow, grinded out style of football game, which I think you have a pretty high possibility of, just because we all know Packers are just going to run the ball if they can. So they're going to try to grind that clock away. So that would be my only real concern here, is that you're limiting the amount of plays or attempts that Kaiser's going to have, which isn't good for a guy that's not very efficient.
I understand Kizer for a GPP contest, but I'm looking at some of his game lines this season. 4 points, 5 points, 2 points, 6 points. I'm wondering if we can actually trust him to even hit that small value for cash games.
Well, the reason I like him, the reason I think that he can hit that value is because, if you look at most recently what he's been doing in those games, it's 3 of the last 5 games. He's scored at least 15 fantasy points, or 4 of the last 5 games, I'm sorry. He's hit at least 15 fantasy points, with the only exception being Jacksonville's defense. He played against the Chargers last week. He played against the Bengals before that. 2 defenses that are really solid. The Vikings back in week 8 where he scored 15 fantasy points. So he has been returning value. And when you're paying just $4,900 for a player, you essentially need 12 and a half points out of him to hit value in cash lineups. So, yeah. I mean, Dan, do you go by that strategy, like the whole 2.5 times thing, like where you're looking at a player's salary and like, let's say it's 5,000, which means he's 2.5 times would be 12.5 fantasy points. Is that typically what you build your lineups around, or is there something else that you look at?
I don't really use it as like a rigid benchmark. It's fine to have something, I think, there if to help visualize kind of at least where you need. But in some positions, in various sports, football especially, you're kind of looking for opportunity costs and raw projections as well. So I think on this slate particularly, you have we don't really have any stud quarterbacks. We're not, if Kaiser puts up 12 points, he's probably not going to kill you on this slate because there's really not a high opportunity cost. We're not fading Tom Brady in a prime matchup where he's going to put up 25 to 30 points.
Here's the thing about Kaiser, too, is that he didn't have Josh Gordon. He didn't have Corey Coleman. And now that he has had those guys, he's been playing a lot better football. So I understand, I guess, using Kaiser this week. I just think there's better options with Phillip Rivers, as you mentioned. And Jameis Winston is my guy. I mean, you look at what he's been doing this year. He's only had 4 or 5 healthy games where he wasn't playing in a tropical storm. 18 points, 26, 18, 26, 20. That's pretty good, reliable production, and he gets Detroit this week, who's a mediocre matchup, so I think we can trust Winston. Plus, there's so much value at the other positions that I think spending up on a quarterback actually makes sense this week.
What do you think about Winston, Dan?
I think that's I think that game in particular, I don't think I would approach Winston in cash, but I think that game could be a fun game stack for GPPs. I think Detroit, and if you look at Golden Tate, who's been underperforming, he's a guy that I would love to come back with. Evans has been absolutely terrible, and he'll see low ownership per numbers this week. And it's a tough matchup, but he does have the size advantage against Slay, so I think he could grab a couple jump balls and hit value right there. So I think that's I think like the Winston, Evans, Braid at tight end stack, and then bringing it back with somebody like Golden Tate is a fine approach for GPPs. I don't hate his floor either in this matchup, so I can see him as a fringe cash game option as well.
Now, Dan, when you talk about these game stacks, like how many players are you willing to actually stack from the same game? How often have you seen this work? Is it like 6 or 7 guys, or is it just like 3 or 4?
Yeah, typically I'm not going to go quite all in. Back in the glory days when the Steelers were functioning on all cylinders, 1-2 years ago, you could realistically play Roethlisberger and pair him with 2 to 3 other options, and then bring it back with 1 or 2 guys. So you could get up to 6 or 7 options. I think in most games, though, ideally you're pairing your quarterback with 1 or 2 wide receivers, and then coming back with 1 or 2 guys from the other team.
Yeah, I like Jameis this week. My only concern is that, and you mentioned it, Golden Tate, he would have been one of my favorites this week, along with Marvin Jones, who just towers over the cornerbacks out there in Tampa. My issue with this one is that if Matthew Stafford isn't healthy, I don't know how much throwing is going to be happening. I know that the Lions can't run the ball. The Bucs, Jameis Winston's going to Jameis Winston, which is why I tend to agree with Dan this, that I would rather go down to Kaiser and cash, but I do think that Jameis is an awesome play in tournaments. I actually think that Mike Evans could be a solid play. Darius Slay, he has been known to allow a couple touchdowns in coverage. So it's not to say if they trust him in one-on-one, he can't get it done. But I think Deshaun Jackson, pairing him with Jameis, it would be very interesting because he's going to see Nevin Lawson in coverage. So there's a lot of things to like about that game. I do want to see a healthy Stafford. If you want to trust Jameis in cash, make sure Matthew Stafford is playing, because if he's not, this is not a game where Tampa's going to have to keep their foot on the throttle.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, we've talked about 3-4 quarterbacks here. Is there anyone else you guys are even considering for cash games? Maybe Jimmy G, maybe even Blaine Gabbert with the way he's been playing?
Yeah, I like Jimmy G's might be my top guy right now. It'll be interesting to see how his ownership kind of trends. I think it's trending upward as the week goes on, which I don't like to hear as somebody that's going to play him in a lot of GPPs this week. I think in general, my concerns with Kaiser are pretty much the opposite with Jimmy G this week. I think if you look at pace of game, I think Houston and San Francisco just jumps right out at you as a game that's just going to have a ton of plays in it. And so, again, something that we can predict a little bit more easily is volume. And so I think Jimmy G will have a ton of volume. I think he's a more efficient option than some of the other options around him in his same price range. And so if you consider that volume, I think he makes a pretty solid floor play this week, especially if you're looking at a site like DraftKings, where I think he's live to hit that 300-yard bonus, where you would get those 3 extra points on DraftKings for that.
Yeah, I mean, he's not going to complete 26 passes for almost 300 yards and get 0 touchdowns again. If he does that, and he should do better than that against a defense like Houston, I think he'll get 2 or 3 touchdowns, right, Tags?
I mean, I like Jimmy G this week. I do. And honestly, he's someone that I look at my rankings and I'm struggling putting him above some options, but I want to. It's almost that weird feeling where it's like, okay, well, we still know who his receiving options are, where Marquise Goodwin is still his number 1 wide receiver. He doesn't really have a tight end that he can trust. He doesn't have a secondary wide receiver. That's my only concern with Garoppolo. I think he looked fantastic last week. His stat line doesn't tell the whole story. He looked great. So I do like the matchup. Houston, ever since week 5 when they lost J.J. Watt and Whitney Merciless, they have allowed at least 18.3 fantasy points to all but 2 quarterbacks, and that was Joe Flacco and Kevin Hogan, 2 quarterbacks who have been brutal all season long. Well, Kevin Hogan didn't get much of a shot, but the best part about it is that teams that have been going against the Texans have been doing it on minimal pass attempts. There's been just 1 quarterback who has surpassed 37 pass attempts, so I do like Garoppolo. I'm just having a tough time liking him more than Kaiser, but I do feel like if someone said, Mike, what if you can't play Kaiser? Who would you play? I might go to Garoppolo if I didn't want to pay up for Phillip Rivers.
I will say a guy that is underpriced if you're looking at DraftKings, or that stands out as underpriced, I should say, but has not been good recently, is Dak Prescott at 5,600 against the Giants. Yeah. He kind of, him and his receiving partner Dez both jump out as guys that are just way underpriced.
What a price. That's incredible.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I have them both right on my sheet right here. Love Prescott, love Dez. I think Dez is cash game viable, but I like them both in tournaments. I think Dak's a solid play. You're never going to see his price this low.
Yeah, he's really cheap.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on over to running back, I want to say congratulations to the winner of the year-long upgrade to our Hall of Fame package, Pete B. He's already been contacted, so if you're another Pete B, I guess that's really unfortunate because you probably got all excited and it wasn't you, but congratulations to Pete on the Hall of Fame package upgrade. And thank you to all the people who subscribed and reviewed us on iTunes. We read all of them and we love the support you guys are giving us. So thank you so much.
No, absolutely. We got nominated, by the way, for Podcast of the Year, and it's legitimately only because of you guys. So thank you. We definitely appreciate it. We're going to continue to try and make the show better for you. And that's obviously starting now. Let's talk running backs. Dan, we're just going to throw it to you. Give us a couple of running backs that you're looking at in cash, whether it be some higher priced options or some lower priced ones.
Yeah, just as we started this podcast, it came out that Mixon is not practicing again here on Thursday. So I think Gio, especially on DraftKings, where he's only 3,100, is going to basically be, I don't like saying lock, but he's a guy that you almost have to play in cash games at that price.
Yeah.
So he's kind of the lower priced option. If you go up a little higher priced, a guy that sticks out is possibly a little too cheap, is LaShawn McCoy for 7,200 against Indianapolis. And then the last guy I'll mention is a high priced guy. He's probably, he does have the highest raw projection on the slate, would be Todd Gurley.
Bobby, what's your take on that? Like, do you want to play Gio? What do you think about Gurley? Is there someone else that you're looking to pay up for?
I don't want to play cash games this week. How about that? I mean, I'm looking at all this. All these running backs at the top. LaShawn McCoy, I'm not going to trust him. Leonard Fournette, I'm not going to trust him. I don't like these options. If Mixon's out, I think Gio is he should be 70% owned, right, in cash games. So yeah, I'll be playing Gio. I'm not going to be stupid and fade him. He's going to hit value, but there's really nobody else I'm excited about. I mean, I guess you have to say Gurley. He's been the best fantasy player all year, but Philadelphia, right? So I don't really like that either. So I don't really know what to do. I was hoping you guys would tell me.
Well, I will tell you this. LaShawn McCoy is an awesome play. I actually love McCoy. I like that call. McCoy has, since he joined the Bills, there have been 9 games where he's been a home favorite. And in those 9 games, he's averaged 21 rushing attempts for 122 yards in the ground, 1.3 touchdowns, and then another 3.5 receptions for 19 yards through the air. I feel like he's a must-play RB1. Honestly, I would play him over Gurley, even if they were the same price. I love McCoy this week. And knowing that it's a winnable game for them, knowing that the defense has been playing better, and it seems like Tyrod Taylor might play, which does help McCoy. I don't think it hurts him if Peterman plays, because I think that whatever the case may be, they're going to run the ball a ton. But McCoy is a fantastic play this week. Love him in cash. I also think, and a lot of people are going to jump through the radio, want to punch me in the face, but Kareem Hunt, at 6,500, his price has come down to the point where he's actually a value now. I know that he hasn't played well recently. I understand that, but going against an Oakland defense who's been kind of battered by running backs all year, at 6,500, he's not a bad play. And then Samaje Perine at 5,600. Love him. I don't like Cousins very much this week. I think it's a bad matchup for him with the offensive line, how it's banged up. The secondary that they offer in Los Angeles, they just match up really well with the Redskins. So I think Samaje Perine, he's going to be leaned on heavily in this game.
Hunt's solid, man. I mean, he's got... I know it hasn't been happening lately, but he's been so consistent in PPR all year. He's got at least 9 fantasy points in every game except for one, because he just gets the ball that much. And I know he's not rushing the ball as much lately, but at that price point, he's hard to ignore.
Yeah, Dan, where are you at with Hunt? Are you like fed up? Are you like completely off of him until he shows us something? Or do you find this is a chance to play him as a value?
I like him in theory. The problems I would have with him this week would be it does look like West is going to come back. I believe Hunt saw season high in snap rate last week, and so West coming back is going to hurt that a little bit. The one thing potentially positive for him, Andy Reid did pass off the play calling. Granted, it sounds like he's overseeing, so it's tough to know how much he has control. But if the Chiefs are able to get into the red zone, hey, we might actually see Hunt get to carry the ball, as opposed to Tyreek Hill, end arounds and throwing passes and things of that nature. So I think he definitely has some positive touchdown regression coming his way if the Chiefs are able to get into the red zone, which is they should be able to in this matchup.
For sure. What do you think of Perine? Do you think that you'd rather go down to him? I mean, he's almost $1,000 cheaper, which is probably where I'd lean, I guess, if I had to pick one. The Chargers, if they've had one weakness this year, it's been against the run. How do you feel about him?
I think he's a guy that's going to go underlooked, or overlooked, I should say. I don't see his... I think it's tough. I think if this is a good game script for the Redskins, you'll see a lot of him. But this game could very easily get out of hand right away. And he's not the guy that you want if the Redskins are playing, from behind 0-14 or something like that. If they're able to get an early touchdown and keep this game close, I think he's in a great spot, and it is a good matchup for running backs.
I like Perine too. The Chargers defense scares me a little bit because they just absolutely shut down Fournette, but they were also stacking the box every single play and forced Blake Bortles. So I don't know about Perine. I think he's got enough talent, but again, it's with the game script thing. If I had to pick one running back right now with Gio Bernard, I think I would pick Lamar Miller. And I know that just sounds disgusting, but it's the San Francisco 49ers defense. And if you had to pick one guy who was going to get 18 touches, I think you'd pick Lamar Miller this week, right? I mean, he's got no competition for work there.
Yeah, I think Miller's a solid play. Ellington has been stealing some of the passing down work once they signed him. Alfred Blue's mixed in a little bit, but yeah, I do think that he's actually a solid play. My issue with him, so playing Lamar Miller, here's the deal. So his ceiling just isn't high. So when you're paying, so he's $5,800, his price came down a little bit, and that's fine. I do believe that he can hit value, but if he misses it, it's going to be by a little bit. And if he crushes, and if he, I'm putting it in air quotes, if he crushes it, he's going to finish maybe with 15, 16 PPR points. It's not crushing value at that point. So I guess I'd prefer just a little higher ceiling than Lamar Miller. That's my only concern, but I don't think he's a bad play. But let's go to the older version of Lamar Miller, Frank Gore.
Oh.
So I don't think Frank Gore is a bad play this week in cash. He's 3,900. He's absolutely free against a Buffalo defense that has allowed 12 rushing touchdowns in their last 4 games, I believe it is, or last 5 maybe.
If you play Deshaun Kaiser, Frank Gore, and Gio Bernard, you're going to have $20,000 left over, man.
I'm going to have a blast is what I'm going to have. Am I off my rocker for thinking that Frank Gore is a solid play at 3,900 against the Bills?
No, I think he was a little bit more in play before. Well, and he still might be, I guess, pending Mixon's status. But I think if Giovanni becomes available, then you're probably looking, Gore becomes obsolete a bit. I don't think otherwise. I think he's a kind of a fine pivot or secondary option if you're trying to go super cheap on with two running backs, but I don't think you have to this week just because, again, there's no real high-priced quarterback you're looking to jam in, and wide receiver also. There's no real, not a whole lot of high-priced guys you're looking to get in there.
That's fair. And you guys may have talked me off of him, but I wanted to mention him just because I feel like he's like a Lamar Miller. He's like the old version of Lamar Miller where it's like he has no ceiling. You're not going to get more than 15, 16 PPR points out of him. But yeah, I felt like he's a solid floor if you want to save some money. So
Lamar Miller, by the way, has over 20 points twice this season.
Yeah, he's scored 2 touchdowns in each of those games. I don't see it happening with Savage I mean, granted, he's played better with Savage than he did with Watson, actually, I think. But I can't project him for 2 touchdowns, and that's what he would have to do.
I mean, we've seen Corey Clement get 3 touchdowns and Austin Eckler getting 2 touchdowns. Like, this stuff happens. Lamar Miller could definitely get 2.
He's just boring. I've played him in cash before, man, and seriously, he just lets me down every time. I don't know what it is. He's been in smash spots before where I've liked him, and he just always seems to let me down. But I think we have a solid core, though. I think we're in agreement that McCoy, once you go up there, McCoy and Gurley are the top 2 higher-priced options. Mid-priced Hunt, Pirine, and then Gio Bernard's like a must-play. If you're playing cash lineups and Joe Mixon's out for this game, Gio Bernard's got to be in your lineup.
All right, well, let's talk some wide receiver tags. You mentioned there are not many good players to spend up on here at wide receiver. So, Dan, who are you looking at this week at wide receiver?
I think the highest priced option you're probably looking at, and he'll be a little higher owned again, just kind of with the way lineup construction's going, is DeAndre Hopkins. He's a guy that efficiency doesn't matter that much with Savage just because he gets a huge number of targets. So you don't have to worry about efficiency as much with him. He's a guy that I think is a very, very strong cash game play. If we're going kind of towards the middle tier then as a cash game option, he's a guy that's getting a ton of hype this week, and I think rightfully so, is Josh Gordon. He's 5,500 on DraftKings, 6,700 on FanDuel. So he's a guy that, again, is another option that should see a ton of targets this week.
In cash game tags, are you going to get 100% exposure to Gordon?
I mean, I only play 1 or 2 cash lineups, so yeah, he's going to be in my cash lineup. 5,500, it's kind of like a no-brainer. I was going through my wide receiver cornerback stuff earlier today, and so not only is Devon House, he's a guy that got benched by Jacksonville last year. They ended up letting him go in free agency. Packers brought him in, low-key, not many teams were involved on him. He was not brought in to be a guy to cover number 1 receivers. Kevin King was the guy that they drafted to do that. He was placed on IR yesterday. We announced that on yesterday's show as it was happening. Josh Gordon just basically gave Casey Hayward one of the toughest matchups of the year. He said that Josh Gordon was the best wide receiver he's faced this year outside of Odell Beckham Jr. And that's saying something because he's seen some phenomenal competition throughout the year. But going back to Hopkins, smash spot, dude. Like smash.
Yeah.
The duo of Dante Johnson and Akello Witherspoon have allowed 6 touchdowns on 88 targets in coverage. There have been just 3 wide receivers to see 10 or more targets against the 49ers, and every one of them scored at least 19.3 PPR points. This is a smash spot for Hopkins. Last week he was like, I don't want to say average because he still caught 8 balls for 80 yards or something like that. So it wasn't like he was bad, but I think this week he bounces back and he has a monster week.
Isn't it hilarious? Before the season began, all the experts, everyone we had on the show, including us, was saying, don't draft Hopkins in the early 3rd round. What are you thinking? Like, he was horrible last year. And here we are recommending him as the top wide receiver with Tom Savage as his quarterback. The NFL's just crazy, man.
DeAndre Hopkins has been nuts. I don't even like
awesome.
Watching the guy. He's like so full of confidence right now, and it's oozing out of him. Like seriously, and it's kind of ridiculous watching him play every single week. Like he's just dominating, and he has catches that don't even show up on the stat sheet because he had 1 foot down and didn't get the other foot in. He had a play like that last week. It should have been a touchdown, but the 1 foot just didn't tap, and he's almost always getting that down. And it's really weird though. I mean, you go back to last year, he's a guy that saw like 140 targets and didn't finish in the top 30 wide receivers. receivers. It's like going back, like, what the hell happened to DeAndre Hopkins in 2016? But here we are in 2017, and this man is like legitimately the hottest wide receiver on the planet. So you're playing him. You're
Keenan Allen, dude.
Well, that's the thing. Do we want to discuss him? Like, is he going to be a higher owned cash option, Dan?
I think you'll see Hopkins probably with a little bit more ownership, and I think rightfully so. I think Hopkins is a guy that's going to continue to sustain his production, and he might even be underperforming in some aspects just because the volume has been so great, and he hasn't been buoying his points totals with touchdowns. Whereas Keenan, I think, has 4 touchdowns over the last 3 weeks. He obviously has been getting the yards and targets to go with it too. But I think there's a little bit more reason to think that this is a peak for Keenan, where Hopkins kind of just continues on.
That's fair.
Did you guys see that tweet from JJ? I'm sure a lot of our listeners saw it because, JJ's tweets are all over the place. But this is a great stat about Josh Gordon. 11 wideouts have seen 8+ targets against the Packers this year. On average, they've scored 19.6 fantasy points per game. And if you remove the 3 Bears wide receivers from the sample, the average jumps to 22.7. So Josh Gordon, man, at this price is it's absurd.
Yeah, no, it's kind of ridiculous. And I mean, the Andy Behrens mentioned it on our show yesterday, and the fact that if you like Josh Gordon, like a lot of people do this week, you secretly like Deshaun Kaiser because someone's got to be throwing him the ball. Someone's got to get those touchdowns. And you kind of secretly like Kaiser, but knowing that Gordon's price is $5,500, you don't have to pair him with Kaiser if you don't want to. I'm probably going to just because I've lost my mind at this point in the year. But is there any guys that is there any wide receivers down the board that you guys are looking at cash? Do you have any interest in Marquise Goodwin at 5,100, maybe Deshaun Jackson at 4,400? Anybody down there, Dan?
I actually like both those guys quite a bit, Goodwin especially, but I think on DraftKings, just because of how their pricing is, I don't think you have to go there in cash. I think you're fine with guys like we mentioned Dez a little earlier that's underpriced. The only problem with Dez is I think forgot who tweeted it out, but somebody said tweeted out the other day. I think he's gone 19 regular season games in a row without topping 100 yards, which is concerning.
Yeah, he hasn't this year at all.
Which is concerning when you get bonuses on DraftKings for topping 100 yards, and that's where some of the value comes from. But he's a guy that I still think is cash game playable. So the construction I would be looking at would be something like Gordon, Bryant, and then Hopkins is my main targets on DraftKings. And then those other guys you mentioned as more secondary options.
That's fair. And yeah, so Dez Bryant, a lot of people might look at historical stuff and they might see that Dez has really struggled against the Giants, and he has. Over the last 2 years, they've played 3 games against each other. In those 3 games, he's totaled a combined 4 catches for 61 yards. But
wow,
but
Jenkins.
Here's the big huge thing. Janoris Jenkins, he's the cornerback that has shadowed him in every single one of those games, limited him, shut him out. He's out. He's not playing. That means he's going to see Ross Cockrell and Eli Apple. Eli Apple is the one who almost went home because they were like critiquing his gameplay, and he had his feelings hurt. He went home. He didn't play last week. We don't know if he's going to play this week, but I would assume he does. And Ross Cockrell has been coming off the bench. Those two have combined to allow a 110 quarterback rating when targeted in coverage. So I do love Dez. It's risky in cash just because we don't know how healthy Dak Prescott is, if his hand is bothering him, but he's had a longer time to recover than Matthew Stafford has, and he's already returned to a full practice, which is positive. So I do like Dez. I think I might like him more in tournaments, but I do have him on my cash sheet as like someone to consider, but I might just go down to like Goodwin or Djax. I think Djax is an awesome play. Like I know that he's not really a cash game play, but he's been oddly enough more of like a possession receiver this year than I thought he would be with Tampa. And I think part of that comes with Ryan Fitzpatrick and the fact that he can't throw the ball over 20 yards. But knowing that Jameis is back, knowing that Mike Evans is going to be shadowed by Darius Slay, Nevin Lawson against Deshaun Jackson's a matchup that I would look to exploit. So but we've talked about it in the fact that this week the pricing is so loose, and we get those weeks every now and then on DraftKings. So you don't necessarily have to find someone like that in cash, and you could just like stay above 5,000 and you'll be okay.
Yeah. There's 2 guys I want to talk about here in cash games. I mostly agree with all the players you guys have been mentioning. Goodwin is a real nice value piece down there. I want to talk about Golden Tate. I mean, I understand he hasn't exactly been the most consistent the past 3 games, but over the past 7 games, he's got 5 games of 69 yards or more. We know that he always gets a lot of targets. He's going up against Tampa. Is this just a Matthew Stafford thing, or would you guys consider him for cash games?
Well, Dan mentioned him. Dan likes him, and I honestly,
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
No, I love Golden Tate this week, but the thing is, I legitimately have an asterisk next to his name. Pay attention to Matt Stafford, because it appears there's legitimate concern that he may not play this game because it's his throwing hand that was hit, and he looked like he was in a lot of pain. Like Dak looked like he shook it off and was like it was uncomfortable, but Stafford looked like he was in like a lot of pain. I thought he broke bones, but apparently he didn't. But yeah, I don't. So Dan, let's pretend this. Let's pretend Matthew Stafford is limited participant all week long. It gets to Sunday. Are you comfortable putting Tate in your cash game lineup?
I think I probably would be. I think it's it's tough because his target numbers, I guess, looking through his game logs, they're not as strong as what I was expecting. Looking through them, and that's basically the primary thing that I'm going to look for. We can measure efficiency or try to project efficiency. But the thing that we really can target or focus in on is volume, and so those are the guys that I can kind of peg for 10 plus targets and think that they get there the majority of the time are the guys I'm going to be looking at. And I do think Tate you can fairly reasonably project him for 8 plus, so he is going to be a guy that's kind of on that fringe cash game range for me.
Now, what about Davante Adams, guys? He's been top 10 receiving yards over the past 5 weeks with Brett Hundley. He gets a real nice matchup against Cleveland this week. He's been getting a lot of targets, 45 in the last 5 games. So what do you guys think? Tags, what do you think about Adams?
Well, he's going to be shadowed by McCourty. Like Davante Adams has been like the number 1 receiver on the Packers now for, over a month. So I would highly assume that Jason McCourty is the one who's going to shadow him in coverage, which has been a downgrade to most wide receivers all year. We had Ratcliffe on a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about how he basically did an extensive shadow on AJ Green back in their first meeting and held him to, I think, like 2 catches, and like the touchdown he scored wasn't his coverage. But I do think he's going to shadow Davante Adams. I don't think it's enough for me to say that Adams isn't a play at all, like in tournaments, because Adams has overcome tough matchups. Like if you go back to 2 weeks ago against Baltimore, that was a really tough matchup with Jimmy Smith in the field, with Brandon Carr there. So I'm not totally running away from him. I just don't think that he's in play for cash.
I love Larry Fitzgerald as well. He's got 51 targets in the last 5 weeks. That's more than Keenan Allen and Antonio Brown. He gets Tennessee this week. I wouldn't mind spending up on Larry Fitzgerald.
I don't even know how I didn't mention him. Do you have any strong feelings on Fitz? Because I love him.
Yeah, I think he's a great option. The only thing with him, I guess he's got a good tag on DraftKings. He's a little higher up there on FanDuel, where I'm not sure if he's going to be a cash game option for me. But he's definitely one of the top overall options of the slate.
Yeah, he just to highlight that, Logan Ryan, the guy who typically covers the slot for the Titans, he hasn't done a great job this year, but he is their starting cornerback and probably the most talented one at this point in their career, and he is out with a concussion. I don't know if he's actually going to be out. He hasn't practiced. He hasn't cleared the concussion protocol. So as of this time, I'm assuming that it's going to be Bryce McCain. Bryce McCain's been in the league since 2009. He's never been very good. This is a team, the Titans team lacks talent at the cornerback position. He's still coming off the bench, which kind of tells you all you need to know. So if Logan Ryan misses this game, it's an even bigger upgrade to Larry Fitzgerald. So yeah, definitely good call.
Any other wide receivers you guys want to talk about before we go over to tight ends?
Nope.
All right, well, let's do it. And before we do get there, I want to take a moment to talk about the sponsor of today's show, TeamRankings.com. Being a DFS junkie, it's easy to let the NFL world just dominate you. But as we all know, it's officially college bowl season, which means storied matchups like the Charon Bundy Tart Cherry Boca Raton Bowl and the Bad Boy Mowers Gasparilla Bowl are just begging for your action. If you're like me, you've probably got a few entries into a college bowl pick'em or a confidence poll going this year. Maybe you're even headed out to Vegas for New Year's to spend some quality time in the sports book. If so, you need to check out TeamRankings.com. We first started telling Fantasy Pros listeners about these guys months ago. They came on and did a podcast episode with us as well, and we talked about NFL pick'em pools. Since then, Team Rankings customers have already won over 1,200 prizes in football pools this season alone. But it's actually college bowl pools where the customized algorithmic pick strategies developed by Team Rankings have delivered an even greater edge. In 2016, for example, Team Rankings customers took first place in their college bowl pick'em contest more than 3 times as often as standard odds would have you expect. If you want to put data on your side this bowl season, check out www.teamrankings.com/fantasypros for exclusive discounts of up to 70% off, plus free offers for 27 bowl picks. Again, that's teamrankings.com/fantasypros. All right, so let's head on over to tight end, and Dan, we'll let you start us off here on who you're looking at.
Yeah, I think the top overall option, pretty much without a doubt, is Kelsey, but he is expensive on both sides. Then if you're not going Travis Kelsey, I think it becomes more a position where you just want to save and go cheap at the tight end position. So you're looking at guys like Steven Anderson, who has seen an uptick in usage due to injuries. He saw 12 targets last game. And again, is in a good game environment this week. And then another cheap guy who gets the Jameis Winston bump. He's cheaper on FanDuel or comparatively than on DraftKings would be Cameron Brate.
Yeah, I love Kelsey this week. And if you're going to spend up on tight end, this is the week to do it, right, Tags? What do you think about Evan Ingram? Is he a decent option as well, or is it all Kelsey?
No, Evan Ingram's in play for sure. With Eli Manning coming back, it gives you a little bit more confidence in starting him rather than Geno Smith. I know a lot of people are going to look at Evan Ingram's passing or receiving line from last week and think, wow, he did really good with Geno Smith. He made a couple highlight reel catches in order to make that happen. He's a really, really good player. Dallas, after the first 10 weeks of the season, I think it was, they did not allow, or the first 9 weeks of the season, they didn't allow a single top 12 tight end. But over the last 4 or 5 weeks, they've allowed Travis Kelsey 73 yards and a touchdown, Austin Hooper 49 yards and a touchdown, Hunter Henry 76 yards and a touchdown. So they've started to show weakness. They are getting Sean Lee back this week, so I think Evan Ingram's a play. But if you're paying up that much, go to Kelsey. Oakland really struggles down the seams. They have nobody deep. Their cornerback position is weak. So if they line up Kelsey as a wide receiver, they're going to struggle covering him. There's so many reasons to like Travis Kelsey in this matchup, especially knowing that once Andy Reid gave up the play calling duties, that Travis Kelsey went and had the game of the year, essentially, even though they didn't use him in the second half for God knows why. Who I want to pay attention to as the week goes on is Hunter Henry. I played him last week in cash and it worked out, but I was watching that game and it appeared he came down with a knee injury and then nothing came of it. There was no news about it and I was like, okay, I won't pay attention to it. It's nothing. Maybe he just dinged it up and it was a stinger, whatever. But he actually, I want to say it was either he was very limited or he missed practice yesterday with a knee injury. So that's something I'm paying attention to. He's 4,600, so he's relatively cheap. And his rise and demise this year came with Mike Williams. Mike Williams, the rookie wide receiver who started to earn snaps with the starters. He was getting out of the field. Hunter Henry was coming off the field. It was hurting his production. Once Mike Williams went down, we've seen Hunter Henry emerge back. So the pricing hasn't quite caught up with Hunter Henry yet. So if he's healthy, if you see him get in a full practice before the weekend, I would feel very comfortable playing him against Washington, who's been arguably worse than the Giants against tight ends. And some people might say, well, no, because they've only allowed 3-4 touchdowns in the season. But it's when it comes to me and tight ends, I want yardage. The touchdowns will follow. And they have allowed 5 different tight ends to total at least 89 yards against them. And that's something Hunter Henry can do. So I do like Henry an awful lot. It's just, I want to see him practice first.
Dan, any other tight ends on your cash game radar?
No, I do co-sign with the Henry play, as well as the Ingram. I think those are both strong options that are going to see some decent target numbers.
Let's move on over to defense. And this is not the week where you can just plug Jacksonville in and say, I'll build my lineup around this. I know that I have to have them. Is there a team like that, Dan?
I don't think so, no. There's not. I'm fine playing Jacksonville defense still, but no, I don't think there's a lock 'em in defense, really.
Can you believe we're at the point, we're this late in the season, okay? And Seattle just beat maybe the best team in football, and Jacksonville is somehow good enough that they are favored by 2.5 points against Seattle.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah, that's like the nightmare, right, for fantasy owners that play in season-long leagues, because you have Russell Wilson, who's been killing it all season, right? And then he comes up to Jacksonville in the playoffs, and you're like, what do I do? There's people legitimately asking me.
Many people ask me, should I start him?
Yeah, it's a real question. So obviously it's, he's
Russell Wilson or Deshaun Kaiser. I've got that question 5 times. Are you kidding me?
Okay, I like Russell. I mean, I like Deshaun Kaiser, but I'm not starting over Russell Wilson. But we're getting off track here. We're going on season-long tangents. But in terms of defense, what do you guys think about the Bills? I mean, Over the last 2 weeks, they've allowed just 258 yards, no touchdowns to Brady. Alex Smith, 199 yards and a touchdown. It's like that was really the only game that Alex Smith has struggled outside of that win game in against the Giants. That was really the only game he struggled. So I don't know if this Bills defense has turned a corner. I mean, Indianapolis has played like garbage. T.Y. Hilton is not going to be inside of a dome, which hurts his projections. So what do we think about the Bills? Is that a defense that you consider, Dan?
Yeah, for sure, especially because Brissett takes so many sacks. So they have almost a built-in floor, even though the Bills aren't generating a ton of sacks themselves. Their overall projection skyrockets in a matchup like this. So I do like them quite a bit.
Who's your favorite defensive play if you're in cash? Like, who's the defense that you're probably going to end up sticking in your team just because you feel like they're the safest option?
Yeah, I think it would be Jags or Bills, really, is kind of my top two options. On FanDuel, if you need the salary relief, I don't hate the Browns defense, as nasty as that sounds. They're
wow.
They're absolute min price on FanDuel, so they're only $4,000 over there. Hundley is another quarterback that takes a lot of sacks, so you kind of have again a possible built-in floor there. So they're a team I can see going to for salary relief. I don't think you need to approach anything like that on DraftKings, though.
That's awesome. I was not expecting that. And you mentioned the Bills. Like, yeah, they're a good play, but on FanDuel, they're $5,300. They're more expensive than the Jags. So you might as well just choose the Jags and, bank on 8 points, maybe get another 25 plus like they've done, 4 times this season. For me, I want to talk about the Packers, though. I mean, they've got 12 sacks over the last 4 games, 6 turnovers forced. They go against Cleveland. And I know we've been talking up Cleveland so much, but it is DeShone Kizer. He does throw 3 interceptions for every touchdown, so we can expect an interception or 3, right?
I don't know. I like Kizer too much. This Packers defense, you can only take away so many parts and still function as like a unit. Not to say that they're a bad play. I don't think that they're a bad play. I think I have them in one of my season-long leagues just because I think that they were a safe floor play because they'll get some sacks. But if I like Kizer so much, I don't want to have that negative correlation.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. Now, let's go backwards here, okay? We're going to talk about GPP plays, and this always goes a little bit faster, but are there any more contrarian plays that stand out here at defense for you?
I guess Browns would be that. Based on your reaction.
What
about you, Tags? Is there someone who stands out here?
I mean, nobody's going to want to pay for Minnesota, but I think that they're actually a solid option against Newton. Cam Newton is obviously going to take some sacks from time to time. He's going to have some games where he struggles to throw the ball. We've seen that throughout the year. Obviously, with Xavier Rhodes covering Devin Funchess, it's taking away his only legitimate wide receiver. Greg Olsen is going to be back on 1 foot, it seems. So I think Minnesota, you're not going to get him this cheap very often, and I think they're a solid play. I think that's going to be a low-scoring game.
Dan, let me ask you this, because I've been wondering, at least I've been thinking this, and I'm not sure if it's true, okay? In GPP, would you say that pretty much every defense is in play? I mean, turnovers and especially touchdowns are so random that we could see any of these game scripts open up. I remember Ryan Tannehill tossing out 4 or 5 touchdowns in the first half a few years ago. And then Miami was up huge the whole game. Their defense picked off some passes, and whoever had all these Miami guys ended up winning in GPP. So would you say like even the Bucks against the Lions, well, the Bucks against the Lions are in play if Stafford is out, but teams like the Giants against Dak Prescott, Arizona against Tennessee, I mean, we could see any of these teams happen to get into the end zone, right?
Yeah, I think it's more or less true what you're saying. I think we can predict defense only so far. I think it's definitely the spot with some of the higher variance on your roster. So it makes a lot of sense, especially if there's not necessarily this week, but if there's a week where you're going to see a quote unquote quote chalk option get a lot of ownership at defense. I think it makes a ton of sense to immediately pivot off them to a different lower owned option, because again, there's just a lot of variance at the position, and it really comes down to trying to get that lucky touchdown.
So, Dan, I know you're the type that you'll play 100 different tournament lineups inside of a contest, like the multi-entry ones. How do you handle defenses there? Do you try and like cap your ownership to one defense at like 20%, or do you stick to like maybe 3 or 4 defenses throughout all of your lineups? How do you approach that when you do the multi-entry tournaments?
Yeah, I'll pretty much cap it around 20%, almost exactly like you said, especially and then on FanDuel, you have to factor in the kicker. That's another high variance position. So those are the 2 spots where I'm going to spread my ownership a little thinner than I would some of the other spots.
That's really interesting. I'm really glad you asked that, Tex, because I was wondering the same thing, and I just totally forgot to ask. Now, over at tight end, it almost seems like kicker this season where it's just touchdown or bust, and it's so hard to predict. In GPP, you almost have to have that guy who's going to catch 2 random touchdowns. Nobody was on Ricky Seals-Jones. What was he, 0.1% or less owned the other week? But who's the guy this week that you could see catching 2 touchdown passes that no one's really talking about, Dan?
Well, if you're going touchdown or bust, he's been touchdown or bust all year, and that's ASJ against the Broncos. So I think he's a guy that actually hasn't shown it, but I do think he has some yardage upside in this matchup as well.
Yep. Denver has allowed the most passing touchdowns in the league. It continued last week with Jake Cutler, and they haven't really allowed a whole lot to the wide receiver position, so a lot of people are going to be excited about Robbie Anderson and Jermaine Kearse. It's not a great matchup for the wide receivers. It's more so for the running backs who catches passes out of the backfield and the tight ends. So ASJ, I mentioned him on yesterday's show as the start of the week, so I am fully on board with the ASJ call, but I also think that some solid plays. I think that Delanie Walker is an awesome play. And I say that because a lot of people are going to either go cheap at tight end or they're going to pay up for Kelsey or Ertz or Ingram. Whereas Delanie Walker is kind of stuck in this purgatory at 5,700. He's kind of overpriced, but at the same time, he's been producing as of late. He's scored 2 touchdowns, I want to say, the last 2 weeks. Arizona was a team that was really good against tight ends each of the last 2 years, but this year they've allowed 4 different tight ends to go for 15 or more PPR points against them. We obviously know Walker is the most consistent option to them. If Rashard Matthews is covered by Patrick Peterson, that helps Delanie Walker. There's just not a whole lot to dislike about Delanie Walker this week.
You know, another guy that I want to mention, and I almost don't want to mention him because it's kind of embarrassing, is Jared Cook. After he struggled against the Pats, I was like, it was just one game. He's going to bounce back. He was getting so many targets, so many yards every game. And then he was going against Denver, 1 reception for 1 yard. Then he was going up against the Giants, and I had to say him again, 1 reception for 9 yards. Is he still a high upside guy, or am I crazy? Like, Amari Cooper's going to be out this week, right? So Jared Cook should get 5 to 10 targets.
Clive Walford out-targeted him last week, so I wonder if there's something to them. I mean, Jared Cook played a lot more snaps, so I'm not going to totally just dismiss the idea that, or just say it's automatically Walford, but Clive Walford was the tight end that they expected to turn into the future, and they brought in Jared Cook because they felt Walford wasn't ready, but he outperformed Jared Cook last week, so I wonder if that's a thing going forward. It's enough of a concern where I'm probably going to avoid it. I just don't think there's much upside with the Oakland offense going into Kansas City because Arrowhead Stadium is one of the toughest places to play. It's a divisional matchup. Yeah. They struggled against Jared Cook last time they played, so I'm sure there will be some adjustments on defense. As Kansas City, they're not really a defense that you attack with tight ends. They've only allowed, I think, 1 tight end touchdown in the entire season.
All right, wide receivers for GPP. And we've already mentioned a bunch of names for cash games who are viable also for GPP contests. Obviously, Tyreek Hill is in there. We don't even need to tell you that. Another guy that I want to mention is Corey Coleman. We're all hyped up about Josh Gordon. Corey Coleman is really good. He's also got the great matchup. So Coleman is big time on my radar. Dan, who's on your radar?
Yeah, I second the Coleman pick. He's a guy where he's just a very strong game theory play. I think, like you said, you'll see a ton of ownership on Josh Gordon. So if you think this is a good matchup for Gordon, it's also a good matchup for Coleman. He'll see, I don't even know, 1/4 of the ownership that Gordon's going to see, maybe less. And he's also a guy that has tremendous abilities, so could produce a lot of points at cheap ownership. To be honest, he was my main guy. But if you have another game theory guy, a guy that looks like he's going to play this week is Will Fuller. Looks to be back. So he's another guy that's going to see low ownership. This Texans offense is getting very concentrated with their other injuries going around as well. So he's a guy that he's been interesting. When he went on his streak, it was because he was catching a ridiculous amount of touchdowns and being ridiculously efficient with that. I don't necessarily think that trend continues, but I could see him getting 7+ targets in this matchup. He's a deep threat, so I do think he makes an interesting GPP option, and he'll see very low ownership numbers.
I like that call. Tags, do you have a few guys?
Yeah, I think we're all aboard Corey Coleman. I had that name down too. It's a fantastic pivot play off Gordon. Trent Taylor is a name that nobody is talking about, and I don't know why. So the thing is, that's like a kind of pivot off of Marquise Goodwin, and Taylor has been like involved in this offense all year long, but nobody's talked about him because he's been that guy that gets 30 to 40 yards seemingly every single game, and that's kind of it. But in his first game with Jimmy Garoppolo, they clicked. He saw 6 targets. He caught all 6 of them for 92 yards against the Bears, who defend the slot extremely well. They've done a phenomenal job with slot receivers this year. You've seen Golden Tate struggle against them. So in a tough matchup, I liked him. And if we like Jimmy G going into a tournament, Trent Taylor is like kind of like a pivot off of Marquise Goodwin. I think Goodwin's is still a solid play. I think they're both in play for tournaments. But I like Trent Taylor. I like Zay Jones at 4,100. I think that matchup for him is fantastic. Indianapolis is now down 3 of 3. They're 3 top cornerbacks. They're down their starting free safety. There's just zero reason to not think that there's going to be some wide receiver to produce. Jordan Matthews just went on IR. Kelvin Benjamin is dead. And there's really nobody else. So Zay Jones at 4,100. I like him in tournaments. Deshaun Jackson. And I think that we need to mention Doug Baldwin at 5,400.
Yep.
Because this is his cheapest price that he, like, I want to say this is $1,000 cheaper than he's been all season long. The matchup in Jacksonville, AJ Boye and Jalen Ramsey stay on the perimeter, which means that Doug Baldwin isn't going to see them. Maybe 25% of the time he'll see them. And if we think that Russell Wilson is going to remain competent in this game, which I think that we can at least expect competent numbers, Baldwin is going to have a large part to do with that. So I think at 5,400 it is a tournament play. I think it's solid. We saw T.Y. Hilton catch a long touchdown against them last week. Something similar can happen with Baldwin.
Yeah, I'm on board with Baldwin. I mean, you don't want to mess with Jacksonville's defense, but Baldwin at that price, he's too good to not get some exposure in GPP. I want to talk about this Broncos offense. Still looks extremely ugly, but we have seen Trevor Siemian go off a number of times. And if he does, you know it's going to be Demaryius Thomas and or Emmanuel Sanders. So I'm going to be getting exposure to all of them in GPP.
I stay away from all of them. Like, Trevor Siemian screwed me last week, so I hate him. And Demaryius Thomas, by the way, like, he doesn't score with Trevor Siemian under center. It just doesn't happen. You have to go back to like the middle of last year to find the last time he scored with Trevor Siemian. So he's not in play for tournaments. Like, if he catches a touchdown, it's a wonder. So he's not catching 2. Emmanuel Sanders, he hurt his ankle again last week. He's been under 30 yards, I think, 3 of the last 4 games. He's got the better matchup, Emmanuel Sanders does. I'm just worried about his health. But if you're going to play one in a tournament, it would be Sanders for me. Demaryius just doesn't find the end zone with Siemian.
How do you keep yourself from holding grudges, Dan? I am so mad at Jared Cook right now. Obviously, Tags is mad at somebody. Do you have players that you just get so mad at, but you just have to play anyway?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I'm trying to think. I know Cooper's my guy that I kept going back to and probably will.
We're all mad at Cooper.
Yeah, he's the guy that sticks out as a guy that I'll always keep playing him and just wait till it pays off. I did have him as big week against Kansas City, so that was nice, but he's lost me more money than he's made me, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, it's you, me, and Peter Jennings in a room together, and we're just crying ourselves to sleep every night. Because I might, Dan, I'm sure I don't know if you've heard our bet, but Bobby and I might have to do the NFL Combine because I bet that Amari Cooper would score more fantasy points per game than Sammy Watkins. I don't even know what to say right now. So yeah, Amari Cooper has let me down, but I'm not holding a grudge because he's too damn good. Yep. Let's talk some running backs and quarterbacks real quick.
Hold on, I have one more name that I have to say. Sorry, hold on just a second. Brandon LaFell. Brandon LaFell has big games all the time.
No, don't.
For real, man.
Stop
For real,
it.
He's getting a ton of targets, man.
This is a bad take.
This is real. Brandon LaFell is going to win someone $1 million this week, and you are going to feel so guilty for stopping our listeners from doing it, Tex.
Dan, would you please tell him to stop?
I mean, we didn't mention the better Bengals option yet.
Yes.
So I'd go to Green before I went to LaFell. Green actually is a pretty solid GPP option. I don't think I could pull the trigger on LaFell.
Yeah, so he's with me. He just didn't want to be rude, but he said it's a garbage take. So we're gonna move on to running back, and we're gonna talk about. I want to say Leonard Fournette is one of my favorite tournament plays because I think people are forgetting how good this guy is. And so we talked about it on the show at Andy Barron's yesterday, so I don't want to go into it too much. But I think Pete Carroll is a coach that sticks to his guns. Like, he doesn't veer off his plan very much. He's not going to bring 8 or 9 defenders in the box against Leonard Fournette. He's going to trust his defense as he always does. They've played good run defense throughout the year, but people forget that Leonard Fournette was playing some tough to start the season, like tough matchups, and he was performing every single week. You look at it: Houston, Tennessee, Baltimore, the Jets, the Steelers. He was crushing all of these teams. If you give a guy like this enough carries, he's going to do damage. At home, they're a slight favorite at home. Not much, but they are. And Leonard Fournette is probably going to be under 5% owned. Like, you're not going to get him under 5% owned very much.
He's got the longest carry on the season as well. You know he can break big runs. If he gets an 80-yard run for a touchdown, 14 points right there, guys.
What do you think, Dan? Am I crazy for thinking Fournette's a solid tournament play?
He's the guy talking about disappointing. He's a guy that kind of disappointed me last week. I was real. I mean, he was fine, but I was real heavy on him, and he didn't outscore. You know, a lot of the cheaper running backs went off last week, so he didn't really put enough of a differential up between them. So he's a guy that I see the logic, I see the reasoning there, and I think he's a guy that's always going to get a ton of volume. So, of course, if you're going to see, 25 touches to 30 touches in a game, then yeah, you have an opportunity to put up a lot of fantasy points.
Hey, I know we're talking about running backs right now, but I have to go back to this. Brandon LaFell has more targets than Mike Evans the last 4 weeks, guys.
He hasn't done anything with him, though, because he sucks.
I don't think Mike Evans is a guy that you want to compare him to right now.
Okay.
Not right now.
That doesn't really make your case.
Jay Ajayi is the last one I'm going to mention. I'm not even going to go into why. I talked about it on yesterday's show. But Dan, is there somebody else in tournaments that you're looking at as a contrarian play at the running back position?
Alf Morris sticks out as a guy that's going to see a lot of running volume. Pretty good matchup for him as well. He's a guy that I think if Dallas gets the lead, we'll see exactly what they did to Washington as well. He's a guy that can see, another guy at 25 touches or so if game script goes his way. So I think he's got a couple touchdown as well as 100-yard upside.
Bobby, how about you?
If Joe Mixon does play, I'm really intrigued by Joe Mixon against Chicago. Just because everyone's going to see that questionable, they're going to think, oh, he's banged up. His ownership's going to be, 2-3%? We know Joe Mixon has big games, so I think Joe Mixon is viable in GPP.
Did he suffer another injury outside of his concussion? Someone told us, I thought I read something. Dan, have you heard anything about this? Like, I want to say that Mixon, on the same play he suffered the concussion, he had like a shoulder injury or something like that.
I haven't heard anything about the shoulder. I know concussion for sure.
Yeah, I thought it was similar to Amari Cooper, where it's like it kind of was swept under the radar because everybody's worried about the concussion. But Amari Cooper is dealing with a high ankle sprain on his concussion, and I want to say I read something about Mixon suffering another injury on that. I don't think he plays for what it's worth. Kind of on a short week. And the Bears defense, they've only allowed, it's been one running back or actually 0 running backs to run for 100 yards against them. They haven't allowed any multiple touchdown games. I think it's a high floor game for Gio or Mixon, no matter who starts. But I don't know if the ceiling is quite there.
I know people are really mad at Jerick McKinnon too, but I mean, we have to admit he does have big play upside. He's had 3 games in his 8 starts where he was top 6 among running backs. And granted, all of them were against pretty crummy defenses, and Carolina is not that. But I think McKinnon, you need some exposure.
What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
All right, guys. Well, let's close it out really quick with quarterbacks. I already mentioned Trevor Siemian, and Tags was really mad at me about it. So, Tags, you tell me, who's a better pick than Trevor Siemian?
Well, Jameis Winston, you already mentioned him. That would be one of my favorite tournament plays. I think that, I know we're not doing the Thursday slate, but Drew Brees, I think, is a solid tournament play tonight. But Dak Prescott is one of the players that I would look at in tournaments as well. Because like I said, I'm worried about his hand a little bit, but at the same time, this Giants defense has been bleeding fantasy points. It seems like, him and Dez got their mojo back a little bit last week. I know that they didn't connect a whole lot, but it was something in the right direction. The offensive line is obviously healthy. The run game showed up last week. So if the Giants have struggled in one area more than the other, it's definitely been the second half, on the back half of their defense. So I do think that Dez and Dak would be a solid stack. And honestly, you might be able to throw Jason Witten in there too, because obviously against the Giants, any tight end is viable. So I think if you do a Dez, Dak, and Witten stack, and then on the other end, you could throw in Sterling Shepard if he's healthy, because he apparently is dealing with a hamstring injury. I loved his matchup because it seems like Orlando Scandrick is going to miss this game, the slot cornerback for the Cowboys. So they're essentially running 3 rookies out there in the secondary. So I think Sterling Shepard would be a solid play if he was healthy.
Jared Goff as well. He's been annoyingly good this season, even though I don't think he's that great, but he does get a lot of touchdowns. Yeah, I mean, because you watch him play and you're like, this is not a top 10 quarterback. But in fantasy, he just keeps getting it done. So I know Philadelphia has a pretty good defense, but I think Jared Goff, if he piles up 3-4 touchdowns again, Could be a top 5 quarterback.
Well, he would if he piled up 3 or 4 touchdowns. I don't know if it happens. I think that game might be lower scoring than some people think. But Dan, what about you? Is there any quarterback in tournaments that you're thinking about playing? Like, does Cam Newton interest you as a contrarian play against Minnesota, or no?
Not really. I think we touched on most of the guys I'm in kind of the cash section. I guess the few guys I will mention, probably have to mention Alex Smith, I guess, at this point. I don't think he'll come close to repeating what he did last week, but he's been a guy that's shown obviously a high ceiling, so I think he's a guy you have to bring up. And then one more is, again, terrible matchup, but Russell Wilson shoulders so much of the offensive load for the Seahawks that even if they score 3 touchdowns, he's going to be involved in all 3 of them, more likely than not.
I've been wondering, like, what his ownership is going to be at, because, like, we obviously know both sides of the argument here. I think some people might think it's contrarian to play him, but I think he's going to be higher owned than people think. It's 6,200.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see his ownership percentage.
He's got 20 touchdowns in the last 7 weeks, guys. That's really good.
Yeah.
I think he's going to have some ownership, 3-4%. And I think those guys don't really know what they're doing. But in GPP contests, I could definitely see getting exposure to him because, I mean, just because it hasn't happened to Jacksonville yet. Blaine Gabbert had a pretty good game against them. Russell Wilson could get over 20 points.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's why he's in play for tournaments. Absolutely. You can never totally cross him off your lineup. Definitely not.
All right, guys. Well, that's all for today's show. Dan, you had so much interesting insight and really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, appreciate you guys having me on.
And for those of you listening to the show today, thank you for listening. Thank you for all the support on iTunes. Subscribe and review us. If you haven't done it yet, you can do it. It takes like 30 seconds and it really helps us out. Thank you also to the sponsor of today's show, teamrankings.com/fantasypros, where you can get up to 70% off college football bowl picks and all the packages that they offer. Please check them out, teamrankings.com/fantasypros. For Mike Tagliere, I'm Bobby Sylvester. Thanks for listening. Enjoy your football.